Dear students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Mr. Darcy. I teach English language. The lesson is on taking notes. We take notes from the text and/or we take notes from a speech and/or a lecture. So specifically, we are going to study how we can take notes from a text. This subtopic that talk about taking notes from the text, we are going to discuss it with a leading question that reads, how can you take notes from a text? So here we need, before we proceed or before we start looking at the strategies that are going to help us in developing our notes, I would first of all need to introduce these two words. We talk about notes and we talk about a text. A text is any form of a written material. Main printed ones. You talk about books or you talk about magazines. So any form of a written material, in fact, is referred as a text. So out of that, then a person can create notes. And what is a note? This is the information that you write down when you are reading. Or is the information that you write down when you are listening. So that piece of writing, which at the end of the day, you use as a summary to review what you have read or what you have listened, that is what we refer to be notes. So maybe a question comes, how important is it that people have to make notes? It helps in learning and understanding topics a lot. You write something important that will make you not forget. Writing things by your own handwriting, it can make you remember them very easy. And when you remember, when that document have in hand, it becomes a wonderful source for you as you are preparing yourself for your exams. And of which it will never make you panic. Because people who do not have notes as they are making revision, it has been shown that they got some difficulties in making revision. So notes is a wonderful tool for making revision. When we are preparing ourselves for exams, we need to have notes that we have created by our own, that they can make us easy to review what it has been learnt, what it has been taught. Because if you find yourself at the end of the day, you don't have notes, and you want to make revision, where are you going to have one? Then you'll need to read a book. Now, reading a book at the time when you are making revision, it will consume a lot of your time. And remember, since it is very big, will have to be very boring. So creating notes makes us have a relaxed mind as we are preparing ourselves for the exams. So here we go. How can you take notes from a text? Now, since a text is referred as any form of a written material, we are in fact need to change a bit about the word take. So taking is at the time when someone is speaking. And in this case, we'll talk about making notes. So the two words take and make, we might use them interchangeably. But our concentration here should, when we have a text, as you read, how can you extract information from that? So it is at this point that I want to take you to the strategies and to the ways on how you can make notes of your own that will act as a tool as you are making revision of whatever you have read. Under the strategies on how you can make notes from a text, there's only one or two things that you have to pay attention on. First of all, you're supposed to read the text thoroughly. You have to read the text carefully. When you are reading it, try to understand the main points. When you understood those main points, you need to take them down. You write down only main points. So as you read, you have to list or you have to write down each important point that you come across with. And how do you write that? You write it by your own words. So you understand what you have read, you come across with the point, you read its explanation. After you have understood what does that main point talks about, that is when you have to take down that important point by using your own words. We are insisting that you have to use your own words simply because it is that way on how you can own those notes that can make you remember very easily. Because if you keep on using the same words that have been used in that written material, it might sometimes somehow make you fail to own that piece of information, and as a result, you might not be able to remember them easily. So, how can we identify main points from a written text? As we read, we are told that new information normally comes at the beginning and given information comes at the end. So it is expected that when you read, whatever you come across with at the beginning, and especially if it is a paragraph, that topic sentence, the very first sentence in your paragraph, it is the one that the main points is normally contained or is normally found. And so, when you think of that sentence to have contained the main point, you need again now to keep on reading the followed other lines to check the elaboration on what has been said. But now, how can you take that as a point? We need also to look at this other information that I'm going to present it to you, because it is the one that will tell you whether this is a new point and this is what. When people write the work, they use what we call transitional words. Transitional words sometimes are known as linking words. It is these linking words that will tell you what kind of information that the writer is presenting. Sometimes these linking words, we can call them some special phrases or special words that we write. And whenever we come across them, then it will suggest to us what kind of information that I'm reading here. Is it a new point? Or it is the same point that has been said in other words? And so on and so forth. So when we are taking down the important points, we have to observe these linking signals, because they are the ones that they can tell us, can I take this as a new point? Or I should keep on reading because there is nothing that has been added, but rather there is an additional explanation that the writer is trying to make. Or maybe the writer is trying to clarify the point. So you need not to put it as an additional point. Let us see these linking signals. And probably from those, I'll try to tell you what kind of a relationship that they bring in sentences. Do they add and or they show contrast, or as a result of something that the writer has presented? The linking signals that I was referring are these ones. We have addition, contrast, and order as headings. Under it, you have these words. These words, whenever we come across with them in a text, that they connote and or that they talk or suggest that maybe the point that has been made is an additional point. So here you know that it is a new point that has been made. So you have to note it down. Differently from the other one. Here you talk about a contrasting idea. That what has been said, it becomes the contradiction of what is going to be said. So you find it's like the happening of one event seems to be like a bar to the happening of another event. But unfortunately, that you find both of the things happen. Whereas the followed column, it talks about the sequence. That whenever you come across with those words, you should know that if you talk about first, that means there is another thing that comes, and of which it has to be the second. So points will be arranged sequentially. But coming to a word like finally, that means this person has come to the end of mentioning and or listing and or making his or her points. You talk about previous. Previous is a linking signal that doesn't tell us whether the point mentioned is an additional one, but rather it tries to refer to the point that has been mentioned before. So when we have these linking signals, as we write notes, it helps us to know as whether this is a new point that you should put it down, and or this could be an elaboration, and or the writer is trying to refer to whatever has been mentioned previously. This is bunch number one of the linking signals. Let us see the other bunch of the same linking signals. And here we have the linking signals that shows results, comparison, and summary. You have words like as a result, therefore, thus, hence, consequently. They all fall under results. You have this type comparison, that you have words like similarly, equally, likewise, just like, same as. So at this point, you talk about the similarity, that what has been mentioned is similar to what is going to happen. So in that case, you don't see that could be a new point. You have this title of summary. You have these words like altogether, briefly, in short, to sum up, in conclusion, or to conclude. When you come across with these words, you need to know that this writer is trying to summarize whatever has been said. And therefore, if you have missed one of the points when you were reading, you could probably find it at that position. That is another bunch of the linking signals. Let's again look at the other bunch of the same. Here we have reason, condition, and concession. In order to, in fact, because of. These are linking signals that talk about the reasons of as to why something has been done. You have these linking signals that shows condition, that the happening of one event could either make the happening of another event and or could be the consequence of, or could be the reason of the other event not to happen. So sometimes you find two things happens, so one happen depends on the occurrence of the other one. Conditional. If, in case, in this case, unless. And the last column indicates those other bunch of linking signals which are referred as concession. All the same, even so, in spite of, although, even though, even if, and however. These concessions, sometimes they can be equal to those that we talk about contrast. That when you have them, they are also talking about the happening of two events. So when one event happens, we do not expect the other one to happen. So it's like they're trying to construct. But you find the other event happens as well. I'll demonstrate about this sometimes as we go. So, out of these linking signals that are mentioned, we'll talk about some patterns, some language patterns that we are entitled or that we have to understand. Things like in spite of, despite, although, not only, but also. These are kind of example words that we need sometimes to know as when we are writing, how do we apply them? Especially in some sentences. But here, as I say, they are linking signals that they are trying to act as bridge, that they're trying to show the relationship of the ideas or the relationship of the portions in a text. How do they relate? That is my point. So, when I was referring to the topic sentence as it gives us and or at sometimes it presents the main idea and or the point that the writer is presenting, it's not all the time that when that topic sentence should be a new point that the writer has made. So it could be represented and or it could be understood by looking at these linking signals, that as to whether the writer and or as to whether the reader should take it as a point and or should look at it or should read as it just as additional information that try to clarify a certain point that has been made previously. So when we are making notes, it is very important that we have to observe these linking signals, because they are the ones in one way or another try to suggest that how can you make or how can you take down the important information. Now, having a knowledge of these linking signals, and now you know how you can identify a main idea. So how do we write that main idea? When we are writing, or when we take down the main idea, we don't have to write everything that you read. As I said, try to understand what it has been written. And in your own words, then you have to take down so that you can remember it. So when you take down, you don't have to copy the whole paragraph. You have to write in short. So we expect to have sometimes phrases and or clauses and even short sentences, which tends to present maybe a paragraph and or two paragraphs. It depends. But when you are writing those information in short, make sure that you write things which are relevant to what it has been presented. But not only being relevant, remember, you are writing them in short, and you will use those notes sometimes after. And in that case, you have to write something which, when you read it later, you should be in a position to understand. Because some other people could decide to put things in short and or as you summarize. But when you write it without thinking about, can I understand this sometimes later when I want to refer? Will it be relevant? Could it be presenting the same information that I read now? This is very, very important. Now, those short sentences or those points that you have identified, how do you organize it? They can be organized in different ways, and of which that will depend on a person, how he or she would wish to write it. A person might decide to use a flow chart. You're trying to put the flow chart just like for example, if you are to write the main idea somewhere there, and then you talk about it having branches like this, as you are listing and or as you are presenting different information in these different boxes. This is a kind of a flow chart that you might think of. That your notes are developed in this presentation, or your notes are developed like this. This is one way, but you can think of using a diagram. What sometimes we call it tree diagram. that you have a point, and that point has been branched, and which again you find this one to have more other branches, and so the same as to this one. 1, let's say 2, this point number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this one again you can find it having more other branches like this, and so forth. So that again will depend on how you present it. This is tree diagram. You could say this is the main point, having these others as sub, and this one could also be branched into many more others, and so it goes on like that. And maybe if you have some of the examples that try to exemplify a certain point, you could also write it in that form. But as I said, when you are writing this, you have to keep in mind that you need to read it later as you want to understand. That could be another way. But some other people might decide to use the outlining. Talk about the outlines. That you simply just list the things, or you list the points as you read. Whatever point you come across with, you list it down. So you go on like that. But make sure as you list them in such a way that you'll be able to remember it. As you're listing, you can decide to use bullets, to use numerals, you can use numbers, and any other form of listing elements. This is how you can organize your notes. But when you are writing this, we want to make things look better. Now, how can you make them attracting? Or how can you make them colorful, that they would attract you when you want to read or when you want to make reference? Sometimes people suggest that in order to make something look good, you might decide to color it. Now, how can you color your notes? We expect maybe you to have main points. So main points, you can decide to color it by writing them in capital letters. And you can think of giving the definition by using a black pen. And the other information can be presented using the blue ones. And those in black and blue, they are in small letters that you differentiate from the main to the definition and to the other information like examples and something of that sort. So your notes, at the end of the day, it will be a useful tool for you to make revision as you are preparing yourself for exams. Now, when you have created your notes, remember, these notes must be comprehensive, that it has to have all the necessary information that you need to remember later. You should not leave anything that you think is important that has not been included. Because otherwise, when you are asked or when you are supposed to make reference, you might not be able to do that. So your notes has to be comprehensive, though it has to be condensed as well. Condensing here I'm talking about having notes that had contained very few words, which those few words, they have to be carefully selected, of which those words have to stand in representing many more ideas. That is why we say you have to write those notes by your own words. And in this case, since they are condensed, that means those notes have to be short, and for that matter, putting these colorful whatever, then it has to make it so sweet. So you're talking about your notes should be comprehensive, should be condensed, short and sweet. Now, sometimes, people ask themselves, why there comes a time when people do not have notes? People ask themselves, what would happen if you don't have notes? Dear students, notes is a very powerful tool that you need to have as you are preparing yourself for your exams. When you miss notes, likely that your preparation would be very poor. Though there is a tendency of people, it might be you, one of them, that you don't take notes when you are reading. You simply think that when you read, and as you understand at that particular time, you would be able to remember it. My friend, that is not. We need all the time to take notes. We need all the time to make notes as we read. Because those notes are the tools that are going to help us in remembering whatever we have read, and especially when it is in a book. Now, let me take you to some of those linking phrases, transitional words, so that we can remember some of the grammar patterns on how we can use them when we are sometimes asked. The grammar words that I'm going to discuss with you, which of course it will be part and parcel of our revision, it is that of the use of the word if, unless, although, in spite of, and despite. Let us take a break for a short while. Dear students, let's look at these words. I want you to look at these words. There are some of the linking words that we saw, and of which I think they are important for you to understand them, because at times they might help you to change some sentences from a certain state to another state, and especially when you're asked to. The word although, despite, in spite of are used at the same position. And when they are used, actually they mean the same way. but maybe how they are written is different. Let us have some example sentences. We have a sentence, or we have these sentences that reads, the sentences reads like, the students studied very hard. The second one reads, the students failed the exam. These two sentences can be joined by one of these linking signals. And when they are joined, of course, now they read as if you're talking about one sentence. Here you have two events. The students studied very hard, that is one. So when students study very hard, the expectation here is one has to pass. But contrary, here it reads, the students failed the exams. Now you can see the two events are contrasting one another. We want to apply this linking signal. Let's see how we can use although to join the two sentences. Can you think of how you can join the two sentences using the word although? If I may to write, although the students studied very hard, they failed the exams. So normally, the word although goes with the first event. So you have to ask yourself, out of the two events, which one came first? It is this activity, and the results of which, this one. So although the students studied they failed the exams. So if you begin your sentence with that conjunction, then the clause should end with a comma. And of course, now again, you don't have to write the word students, because that would be a repetition. Having the same word twice in one sentence, that is monotonous. And in fact, we are not encouraged to. So with that, we had to use this pronoun to refer to that noun. These clauses can be rearranged. That the second clause could come at the beginning, and the first clause here could come second, or could follow. I might say that the students failed the exams although they studied very hard. So in this case, if you are to begin with this clause, you cannot start by they, because this one won't tell us what does it refer. So it cannot make a reference to something which is going to be mentioned, later. So a pronoun has to refer to something that has already been mentioned before. Now this although can be replaced by a word despite. And when you replace by the word despite, would you just simply remove this word and leave the other words the same? The answer becomes no. Despite and in spite of, they can be used interchangeably. But how would your sentence look like? That despite, so in spite of, when we are to write them, they can be followed by this phrase, the fact that. And when it is followed by that phrase, then that's, of course, you can simply replace the word although. So you can have your sentence that reads, despite the fact that the students studied very hard, they failed. That's number one. But you can also think of another way on how you can use despite. Despite can as well be followed by the ing participle. Now, when I talk about ing participle, that means the clause which has to go with the word despite has to have its verb in ing form. Now, in this case, how would you go about it? Despite studying very hard, students failed the exam. Students failed the exam despite studying very hard. And so forth. And as you say, this in spite can be used interchangeably with despite. In spite of studying very hard, the students failed the exam. In spite of the fact that the students studied very hard, they failed the exam. And so how you can apply it? You have if and unless. These if and unless are in fact used in conditions, are used in conditional sentences. That the happening of one event becomes the condition of the happening of another event. If you study hard, you'll pass your exam. That could be an example, maybe. If you study hard, you'll pass the exam. You have this word if. The first event becomes the condition of the happening of the second event. And if the first event does not take place, that means the second event would never happen as well. That is what and how if is used. So at this point, we now know that when there are two things that have to take place, and if one depends on the happening of the another, if has to be applied. But things happen in their negative and positive way. If this event hasn't happened, this one could have not happened as well. This sentence is in positive. How do you say it in negative? If you don't study hard, you will fail or you won't pass the exam. So instead of using if you don't study hard, you can use unless. So that clause which begins with if will have to begin with unless. And unless in short means if not. So you have the element if and the negative word. The word which shows negative. So if your sentence reads like if you do not study hard, you have this auxiliary together with that element not. And since if not means unless, so in that case, if you are to replace unless, the if and the negative element there has to be removed. And what you remain with now, if you remove if and do not, replacing the word unless, what you remain with is you plus those other words that remain. Unless you study hard. But on the second part, the phrase has to remain the same. Unless you study hard, you'll fail the exam. So don't start asking yourself, why had I changed the word pass to fail? It seems like the two words are in opposite. And since this is a negative and this one is also negative, fail, to fail is like in a negative, it's more negative than to pass. But if you want to retain what it has been written, it should read like, you will not pass the exam. And this will not, sometimes people contract it by, you won't pass the exam. This is what and how if and unless can be used in some sentences. Of course, as I said, we have a lot of these linking words as they can appear in a text. Now, whether they help us to signal what we talked about in linking words, as whether they help us to signal whether the writer is shifting to another point and or trying to show contrast and or trying to show whichever subheading we mentioned in those linking signals. Maybe similarity, contrast, reason, summary, and whatever. That we can as well use these linking signals to rewrite different sentences to mean different other thing in some grammatical elements or grammatical expression. So there is a way on how we can treat them. Mind you, I was trying to demonstrate these linking signals as an example for the rest. But the topic we are discussing is still, how can you take notes from a text? As we said, notes are very powerful tool that you need to own as you are preparing yourself for the exams. Because that can make you have a quick revision of the things that you read at times when you are in classes. It helps you to remember. And when you have this habit of creating notes, it might not end when you are a student at school. It has to develop or it has to go on and on and on, even when you are through with your classes. Because that one will make you be able to know and remember many things. Remember, knowledge is very powerful. When you write something down, some people say it is also rewritten in your brain. And once it is written in your brain, then it sticks and you'll keep on remembering it now and then. Thank you very much for listening. Keep on watching Darasa Online.